Okay folks, 2008 Honda Civic EX. This is your car guy, by the way. We're doing the rear brakes. I've got it lifted, secured on jack stands. I've got my tire off. You can see our pad's worn just right down to the limits. Kind of have a funny wear pattern on our brake rotor. We're going to go ahead and take off our two caliper mounting bolts. They look to be a 12 millimeter. We'll get them off and then we can pry our caliper away and start changing our pads. When you go to loosen these up, the 12 millimeter on the outside, many times this whole bolt wants to turn, and then you're going to need to take a 17 millimeter wrench and hold the inside while you're breaking loose this bolt on the outside. That'll allow you to break it free. Once you have your bolts out, you can simply reach in and leverage and pry out the caliper to get it free. Now you won't have as much freedom of movement with the rear calipers as you do with the fronts, and mainly that's because you have a park brake cable that comes in here as well. But once you have it up and out, you can then just simply pull the pads right off of the rotor or the brake rotor, and you can see it's a little bit tight in there, but these should slide right up and out for the most part. If you need to pry on them a little bit, you can, just to get them freed out of the bracket that they sit in. And I can see it's kind of a tight fit. That might be part of why this one's worn so fast, is it may be a little tighter than it should be in there, and therefore not backing off when the brakes are applied. Boy, look at the terrible wear. We're right down to just touching metal, starting to hit the brake rotor there, and the pad's completely worn off. Just looks terrible. It really appears to me, based on what I'm looking at, that this is hanging up and it's not allowing the pads to back off, mainly because it's too tight right in here. So what we're going to do, we're going to take these off and we're going to clean really good under them and make sure that our pads aren't that tight. You know, they got to be in there securely, but they don't need to be as tight as they are right now. Our inside pad looks good, but you know, this demonstration of what I see here, that's overheating. Now, there's a great example. See how we've got this side is really low and this side's really a lot thicker. What that tells me is that we have a problem with our slides. One of them's not moving in all the way like it should, and it's allowing the brakes to get at an angle. Either that or somebody's actually bent this, but most likely it's not the bent brake caliper mounting bracket. It's most likely that one of these slides isn't sliding as well as it should, or that our pads again are hanging up and kind of pulling in to the brake rotor. So we'll get those cleaned up and get our new pads on. We got to go ahead and compress our piston here. Now these pistons, if you look at it, you see that cross hatching? These actually screw back in. They make a tool that kind of looks like that big plus sign that you can stick in there, and you just turn it back in. You can use a large screwdriver if you have one, or even a pair of, I'll take a lot needle nose pliers a lot of times and set them across that and then just turn to get it turned back in. All right, so as we got into this, I went ahead and I took loose the emergency brake bracket so I could get a little more visibility in here. But what we've got going on and why really everything's happening is this piston is seized, and you can see how the boot's kind of pulled up around there. The boot's actually torn, and that allows moisture and dirt to get in, and what it'll do is it'll rust and it can seize these pistons. And that's part of why we see such terrible burning and wear on our brake pads. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and replace the brake caliper. I'm also going to replace the brake rotor. To replace the brake rotor, we're going to take out these two bolts that mount the bracket. We'll get the bracket out of the way. We have a Phillips headed retaining screw, two of them right there. We'll remove the brake rotor. When I go to change my brake caliper, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take loose the brake line And I'm gonna have my new brake caliper right there so I can put it right back on and try to lose as little fluid as possible. Then we'll bleed the brakes when we get done. So first things first, I'm gonna go ahead and get this bracket off, and I'm gonna go ahead and remove the brake rotor. So I'm gonna take out my 2 bolts back here, and they feel like they're gonna be a 13 or a 14 millimeter, and we'll get out our 2 screws right here. With the screws out, I just simply smack the rotor from the rotor from behind, just to get it loose. Knowing that we're replacing it, I don't mind hitting it. Otherwise, I would have used the jacking holes, which are these right here, where you can thread in a bolt to push the rotor off. So we're going to put a new rotor on. So now, gives a little more easy room to work with. We're going to take the line off, and we're going to put our new brake caliper on. Here's our new brake caliper. It came with a new bracket, new hardware, and slides that make sure everything's being replaced properly. So what we're going to do is, we can do this a couple of different ways. We'll get the line off, and we don't necessarily want to make a mess, so we're going to move fairly quickly. I'm going to have this bolt, which is the feed bolt where the line comes in off. We've got new copper washers that come with it. One will go on the top and one will go on the bottom of the brake line, so we'll make sure to have all that ready to go when we pull this off. So this is a 14 millimeter bolt head. What you want to be careful of is you don't want to put too much strain on your brake line while you're doing this. So sometimes I have them mounted up when I do it, but I'm going to go ahead. I've got an impact gun. I'm just going to zip that right out for me. All right, you can see this wet spot drying. That is where I've cleaned off the lube and oil that they put on these new brake rotors when they ship them to keep them from rusting. I'll put in my 2 securing screws, and then next we'll be able to install our bracket. With our bracket bolted in, we'll put in our hardware, and this just snaps right into place. You got one on the bottom, and then another one's going to go up right on the top here, and that's what allows the brakes to slide nice and easy in and out. We'll put those on, and then we'll hook up the park brake cable that we had to take off in order to change that caliper. Okay, so to put the park brake cable in, first we got to get it through the bracket. You slide the head part first through, and then we're going to get the body of the cable up in there. Now, because of how this is all mounted, it's going to be a bit tight getting all this in at first, and you'll maybe fight just a little bit. But once you get that fully engaged and all the way in, there's a clip that'll slide in to lock that in place. I'll show you that in just a second. The next thing we've got to do is we've got to get this end, if you can see it, under this arm. And what we'll do is we'll push the arm down, and that arm is actually what activates the park brake. Now I'm doing this now instead of with it's all mounted up and I've got brake pads in there, because it's going to push out my piston a little bit, and if I had my brake pads in, I'm really going to be fighting to get that in. So what I'm going to do to make this easier is I'm actually going to remove the spring from the park brake by just prying it down and out, and it's easy to install later. That gives me the ability to push down, get my park brake in place and back on. Then I can simply put my spring back in place. The spring, you'll see, goes like that, fits over. Then I can take my screwdriver and simply pry it back underneath and into position. All right, so we'll get our screwdriver underneath there, pry that underneath, and then pull our screwdriver out, and our spring's back in place. Park brake's hooked up. Now we can install our brake pads. Now remember, when you're doing your brake pads, the brake pad that has this spring, which is the wear sensor, needs to go to the inside, because normally that's what wears the most. So we've set our pads in. We've got our outer pad that does not have the spring on it, the inner pad that has the spring. We do need to make sure we install this clip. This is the retainer that holds the park brake cable in place. and it just simply slides under with this bow going away from the bracket. And you'll just shove that in. Sometimes you'll have to tap it in with a hammer until it just locks up against the cable. That's what that clip looks like fully inserted. Okay, we need to install this spring up in our caliper. So what it'll do, it'll go in, and if you look, you'll have a tab come through the top there. We'll shove it up and it'll come down, and it just rests inside there, and it'll pressure on the brakes going down. Then we'll pull our caliper up over our brakes, and mind you, because of the park brake cable, it's going to be tight getting over this one. We'll pull it up over and make sure we keep this in place while we do it. Pause. If you want to give yourself a little more room while pulling the caliper over, there's a park brake mounting clip right here. Take that bolt out. That way the park brake cable will give you some more room. It'll allow you to come out over this a lot easier. Okay, now that we've got it to this point, we can simply install our caliper mounting bolts. And like I said, because we've replaced with a remanufactured caliper, these won't be the exact same size that the ones you took off were in many cases. They may be. It just depends on who you're getting the caliper from and what they did to remanufacture it. Now it's just a matter of tightening those up. We'll reinstall that bracket that we took off for the brake cable to give us a little bit more room. We'll tighten these up, then we've got to bleed this brake because we took this caliper off. So I'm going to go ahead and get things tightened up, and then we'll bleed the brake. Okay, now I've got everything tightened up. We're going to go ahead and start bleeding the brakes right now, which means opening this bleeder valve. Doesn't mean taking it out all the way. These bleeder valves, once you get them open a little bit, it'll start to allow fluid to escape. Now the first thing we'll do is we'll let it sit for a few minutes and see if it starts to gravity bleed, which a lot of times it'll do. What it's saying is there's just pressure in the system. It'll start to fill up this piston down here and then bleed out the top. The next step to bleeding, there's two different ways to do it. One requires a partner. That would mean having them press the pedal down and holding it on the floor. While it's on the floor, you would close this valve. Then you could let them let up, and then you can open it back up, have them push it to the floor again, close the valve before they let up, and you do that until there's no more air coming out. The other option, if you have a vacuum pump, you can hook the hose right here with a vacuum pump into a cup that comes with it, and you can actually suck the fluid through into the cup, and that's an easy way to do it by yourself. It's 6 of one, half a dozen another, just depends on what you've got for people to help you. So in this case, I'm going to have an assistant go and help me bleed these brakes. Okay, so I'm going to show you some bleeding here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have my partner that's in the vehicle pump the brake pedal up till they get a good hard pedal, and then hold it to the floor. So go ahead, pump it up and hold it to the floor. So pump it several times. All right, hold it on the floor. Now, while they're holding it on the floor, I'm going to open the bleeder valve and then close it back up. Now, if you saw that spurt of air coming out, that's what we want to see. We want to remove the air and just have clean fluid. So, pump it up again. Hold it on the floor. And that's how we do it. Let up. Now, as you'll notice, that gets a little messy. I should have done this first, but I've got some absorbent I put down to capture any fluid. You can also sometimes put a hose on and run it into a bottle so that you make sure you don't make a mess. But and I've also put my gloves back on. All right, we're gonna pump it one more time, up several times, hard and fast. Now, I see a problem. Our brake valve's not actually closing quite as tight as I would like it, so all right, keep pumping. Hold it to the floor. Okay. A lot of air still. Let's do it again. Let up, pump it up. Hold it on the floor. Wow, look at that. Just a little bubble of air that time. Let's do it one more time. Pump it up and hold it to the floor. All right, hold it. And look at that. No air bubbles. We close it, and you can let up now. All right, we'll make sure our bleeder valve's tight. We'll go ahead and take a little brake clean. We'll spray off all this brake fluid that's gotten on there. Make sure too that you check your brake fluid in the reservoir before and after you do this. You don't want to run out of brake fluid while you're doing this, otherwise you'll actually put more air into the system. So that's it. We've got the brakes done. If you didn't have to do a caliper, you can skip all that extra we did. Make sure you pump the brakes up good after you're done anytime you do a brake job, just because you need to reseat that caliper back to the rotor. Otherwise, when you first get in, the pedal may go to the floor. This is your car guide. Don't forget to like and share our videos. Please subscribe to the channel and help us grow.